Now I have to mix Schoolhouse Rock with my jazz repertoire. I got the idea of a title called 3 is a Magic Number, and that was the first one I presented to them.
Like most people who grew up in America, you probably remember Schoolhouse Rock as catchy songs between cartoons. But you'd be wrong. Behind every line lies a tragic story of lost master tapes, beloved singers who got cheated by Hollywood, and a nearly destroyed legacy. Who were these people behind the show? And why did their greatest success come at such a personal cost? From ABC's network to Disney+, these are the surprising stories and tragic facts about Schoolhouse Rock that change how we remember the show today. The accidental idea. It all started with one family trip back in the early 1970s. An advertising executive named David McCall took his family to a dude ranch in Wyoming. He had a son who couldn't stay still long enough to learn his multiplication tables properly. At first, David thought it was because his son wasn't very smart. But during the drive, something very interesting happened. To his surprise, the young boy could accurately sing every word from more complex songs by the Rolling Stones without making a single mistake. At the time, David was running an ad agency called McCaffrey and McCall. Seeing the difference between what his son forgot and what he easily remembered gave him an idea that stayed in his mind. What if learning multiplication felt more like singing an interesting song rather than sitting through a lesson? Back at work, McCall shared the idea with his co-worker George Newell, the agency's creative director who loved music too. But as we'll see, their first try did not go very well. A staff writer in charge of jingles wrote a song about multiplication. It sounded like a boring commercial filled with numbers, and McCall knew right away that it was not good enough. Though kids didn't know much, they could still tell the difference between a real song and an ad pretending to be one. Their attention didn't stay with fake songs for very long either. Then a new connection changed everything. Newell talked with a jazz bass player named Ben Tucker. Tucker told him about a piano player he worked with named Bob Duro. Duro had performed with Miles Davis and had written songs for some of the biggest names in jazz music back then. David McCall explained that he wanted a song that treated multiplication as real math and real music, and Duro was the only person who tried out for the job and treated it like writing an actual song instead of making a silly joke. He spent about 3 weeks testing different ideas before finding the one that finally worked. That winning song became 3 is a Magic Number, and it turned the 3 times table into a fun rolling tune that was easy to enjoy. Even more surprising, it did something that almost no learning material had done before. It made a math fact feel like something you would happily hum while taking a shower. When Newell's co-worker Tom Yo heard the recording, he picked up a pencil and began drawing characters to match the music. He did this on his own, with nobody's suggestion. As he'd later admit, he simply could not stop drawing after he heard the song. That one moment changed the project from only sound into an animated cartoon. Not long after, the team had something exciting to show. David McCall's group built a demo reel around the song and shared it with ABC, the same TV network that was already the agency's biggest client. The idea worked, and ABC added it to its Saturday morning lineup. The reason the song became so memorable was simple. For the first time on TV, a real musician took a children's project seriously instead of talking down to kids. Children were treated seriously, like they had a show that catered to them just as much as the shows made for their parents. That idea became the model for everything that came next. Every new song would last almost 3 minutes, which was short enough to fit between cartoons, but also long enough to teach with assured attention. Behind the scenes, there was an important rule that most people watching never knew about. Teachers from Bank Street College of Education checked every set of lyrics to make sure the facts were correct before anything went on TV. Even though the show was created by an ad agency and a jazz musician, it was judged by the same standards as a school textbook from the very beginning. No one took shortcuts just because the audience was only 7 years old. Believe it or not, the meeting with ABC almost ended very differently. The team made storyboards that matched the recording and showed them to a young ABC executive named Michael Eisner, who was in charge of the network's children's shows at the time. Eisner also invited the famous animation director Chuck Jones to the meeting. Jones was the man who created the Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote cartoons. He liked what he saw so much that he suggested the network buy it for his own collection show. Years later, Eisner would become the head of Disney. Once ABC agreed, the business side of children's TV quickly took over. The producers of the network's regular 30-minute and 60-minute Saturday morning cartoons had to cut 3 minutes from their own shows to make room for the new short TV segments. Companies such as General Foods, Nabisco, Kenner Toys, Kellogg's, and McDonald's agreed to pay for those short segments. Thanks to these efforts, what had begun as one father's small side project quietly grew into a regular part of some of the biggest cartoon shows on American television. Here is the part you didn't realize while singing along in the 70s. The hidden genius behind the songs. The music behind Schoolhouse Rock was not written by children's entertainers, but was put together by some of the most respected jazz musicians in America. The same circle of players who backed big names like Miles Davis and Frank Sinatra. Bob Duro had spent decades in serious jazz rooms before he ever touched a Schoolhouse Rock song. He wrote Devil May Care, a tune Miles Davis later recorded. He worked with legends like Mel Torme's collaborators and toured with some of the biggest names in the genre. When he agreed to write for a Saturday morning cartoon, he did not simplify his musical instincts, but brought them with him, and that is exactly why the songs still sound good decades later, instead of dated and childish. Duro did not work alone for long. As time went on, the show expanded past multiplication into grammar, history, and science, and he brought in popular musicians from the jazz community. Jack Sheldon, a jazz trumpet player with a gravelly, instantly recognizable voice, became the sound of Conjunction Junction and the singing bill in I'm Just a Bill. Dave Frischberg, a witty jazz pianist known for clever lyrics about baseball players and everyday life, wrote I'm Just a Bill itself, one of the most quoted pieces of civic education ever put to music. Lynn Ahrens, who later became a Broadway lyricist, wrote and sang Interplanet Janet.
9 planets large and small parading by.
Some of the background vocals on certain segments were sung by the children of the musicians and producers involved. A 10-year-old and a 12-year-old, the son and daughter of producer Radford Stone, provided young voices for a history segment. It was, in its own small way, a family business dressed up as network television. And through all of it, the educational accuracy never slipped. Every fact, every historical date, every grammar rule got the same fact-checking treatment from Bank Street College that the very first song received. The show could have coasted on catchy hooks alone. Instead, it insisted on being right, which is part of why so many adults today still trust what they learned from a cartoon. Duro's own resume outside the show reads like a jazz history lesson on its own. He co-wrote Coming Home Baby, a song that earned Grammy nominations and became a top 40 hit for Mel Torme. Decades after Schoolhouse Rock began, he still mentored younger musicians, including singer and pianist Nellie McKay, whom he first met in the late 1990s and later worked with in the studio. The same man singing about hooking up words and phrases was, in the rest of his life, a respected elder statesman of American jazz who happened to say yes to a strange side job that outlived almost everything else on his resume in terms of public recognition. The neuroscience behind why this worked did not fully catch up to what these musicians already understood by instinct. Set information to a strong melody and rhythm, and the brain holds onto it differently than it holds onto a spoken fact. That is why so many adults can still recite the preamble to the Constitution word for word decades later, but could not tell you what they had for lunch last Tuesday. Duro and his jazz friends were not chasing a scientific theory, just writing real music they loved. And it turned out, real music is what made the lesson stick. But no one had any idea what was about to happen. Moving into American pop culture. Something happened to Schoolhouse Rock that rarely happens to children's programming. It did not just entertain a generation, it became part of that generation's permanent shared memory, the kind of thing strangers can quote to each other and instantly bond over decades later. The clearest proof of that came from hip-hop. In 1989, the group De La Soul built one of their most beloved songs, The Magic Number, around the DNA of 3 is a magic number. a cartoon multiplication song from 1973, became the backbone of a genre-defining hip-hop track 16 years later, introducing an entirely new generation to a melody their older siblings or parents had grown up on without them even realizing where it came from. The show's fingerprints kept showing up in unexpected places. In the 1994 film Reality Bites, a movie meant to define an entire generation's mood, the cast sings Conjunction Junction and I'm Just a Bill together, using the songs as shorthand for a shared childhood. That is a strange kind of power for a Saturday morning interstitial to hold. It became a password. If you knew the words, you were part of the club. That same melody found an entirely new audience decades later in a completely different way. De La Soul's sampled version of the song plays during the end credits of Spider-Man No Way Home in 2021, introducing a fresh wave of younger moviegoers to a tune that traced all the way back to a father's frustration with multiplication tables 50 years earlier. A song built to teach 7-year-olds their times tables, ended up closing out one of the highest-grossing superhero movies ever made. Even the show's mistakes became part of pop culture. Interplanet Janet confidently listed Pluto as the 9th planet in our solar system, which was scientifically accurate in 1978, when the International Astronomical Union reclassified Pluto as a dwarf planet nearly 3 decades later. Later broadcasts and home releases had to quietly rewrite the lyric, changing it from the farthest planet from the sun to used to be a planet, but now it's not. A children's song became an accidental time capsule, dating itself the moment science moved on without it. And I'm Just a Bill did something almost no piece of children's media has managed by becoming the default explanation adults reach for to describe how laws actually get made. Politicians have quoted it on the floor of Congress, and journalists reference it in serious news segments about legislation. A 3-minute cartoon about an anthropomorphic piece of paper sitting on Capitol Hill became more memorable and arguably more accurate than most high school civics classes. The show also collected real industry recognition along the way, not just internet nostalgia decades later. Across its long run, Schoolhouse Rock received 8 Daytime Emmy nominations and won 4 of them for Outstanding Children's Programming, and the Multiplication Rock soundtrack itself earned Duro a Grammy nomination, though he'd lost that year to a Sesame Street release. None of that came from a show trying to be just unique, but from a production that critics and industry voters treated as a real achievement, right alongside shows that were not trying to teach anyone anything at all. By 2023, 50 years after that first multiplication song aired, ABC put together a primetime sing-along special with the Black Eyed Peas, Shaquille O'Neal, and the Muppets, performing the old songs for a new audience. Nostalgia for Schoolhouse Rock had become old enough to have its own nostalgia. That is not something that happens to forgettable television. It happens to the rare kind of show that quietly rewires how an entire generation thinks. The show that nearly disappeared. Now here is the part of the story most fans never learned. Schoolhouse Rock almost vanished completely, and for a while it actually did. After 12 years on the air, ABC ended the original run in 1985. An executive in the network's children's programming division wanted to make room for other content aimed at a new generation of viewers, and Schoolhouse Rock was pushed aside. What happened next should have been the quiet end of the story. Instead, it became something closer to a warning about how little institutions sometimes value the things people love the most. The original animation cells, the actual hand-painted images used to make the cartoons, were now allowed to be discarded. Nobody preserved them, and the sheet music and arrangements for the songs were lost track of entirely. And the master audio tapes, recorded in professional 24-track format, went missing altogether. For years, one of the most beloved pieces of American children's media effectively had no complete, professionally preserved record of its own existence. The tapes eventually turned up in a barn in Connecticut, saved more by luck than by anyone's plan. While all of that was quietly falling apart behind the scenes, something unplanned was happening among the people who had grown up watching. A petition drive started at the University of Connecticut. Students and young adults writing to ABC and asking the network to bring Schoolhouse Rock back in some form. In 1990, Organizers of an education symposium at Dartmouth College invited the show's original producers and writers to attend, and roughly 900 students showed up, all of them instantly able to sing along to songs they had not heard since childhood. Nobody had asked them to remember. They simply never forgot. That grassroots pressure worked. Between 1993 and 1996, ABC brought Schoolhouse Rock back with new segments covering money and finance, alongside reruns of the originals. A stage musical called Schoolhouse Rock Live opened in Chicago in 1993 and ran for 8 straight months to sold-out crowds, a sign that the demand was not just nostalgia from a handful of superfans, but something much wider. The comeback did not stop in the 1990s either. A 1987 home video release brought actress Cloris Leachman in to introduce the classic segments for a new wave of kids on VHS. And in 2009, the creators returned once more for a direct-to-video special, adding new material decades after most people assumed the franchise was finished. A show that ABC had once tried to quietly retire kept finding new reasons to come back, largely because the people who grew up on it refused to let it stay gone. Then came the twist that changed who actually owned the whole thing. In 1996, the Walt Disney Company acquired Capital Cities and ABC in a massive media deal. Schoolhouse Rock, created by an independent advertising agency and licensed to a network, became Disney property almost as a footnote to a much bigger corporate transaction. The show that a father made to help his son with multiplication was now owned by one of the largest entertainment companies on earth, and the people who wrote its songs had signed the kind of work-for-hire contracts common in advertising, meaning that the company that acquired the rights, not the songwriters, would benefit from every future re-release. Now, this is where the story turns bittersweet, and it is the part that gets left out of almost every nostalgic retrospective. Bob Dorough kept performing jazz well into his 90s, still touring and recording decades after 3 is a Magic Number first aired. In 2002, the State Department and the Kennedy Center selected his trio to serve as jazz ambassadors on an international tour, a recognition of his standing in the jazz world that had nothing to do with cartoons at all. But despite writing and performing some of the most repeated melodies in American television history, Dorough and his fellow musicians did not become wealthy off their work. On Schoolhouse Rock, the advertising industry norms of the era meant most of the creative team worked under contracts that paid for the work itself, not ongoing royalties tied to how many millions of times those songs would eventually be watched, streamed, and quoted. Dorough passed away in April of 2018 at his home in Pennsylvania at 94 years old. Jack Sheldon, the gravel-voiced trumpet player behind I'm Just a Bill in Conjunction Junction, died in December 2019. Dave Frishberg, the pianist and lyricist who wrote I'm Just a Bill itself, died in November of 2021, also at 88. Within a span of about 3.5 years, the show lost the core of the jazz musicians who had quietly built its sound, one after another, mostly without the kind of public tribute that musicians of their actual stature in the jazz world would normally receive. Sheldon had spent his final years still hosting jam sessions at his own home in the Los Angeles area, playing trumpet even after a stroke had weakened his right hand, simply because he never stopped wanting to perform. Frishberg kept writing and recording new material well into his 80s, right up until the year he died. They never got the wider public recognition that their day job on Saturday mornings deserved. As for the songs today, they are on Disney+, as well as in classrooms where teachers use them. The people who made it did not get rich, and sadly, most of them did not live to see the show's 50th anniversary special in 2023. But what they built outlasted the network that almost let it disappear, the barn where its own master tapes sat forgotten, and every one of the executives who thought it was time to move on. A father wanted to help his son learn multiplication by making a song. 50 years later, strangers on the internet are still singing the song today. Which of these points changed the way you remember the Schoolhouse Rock show? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Also, click the following video on your screen and you will enjoy it.